Hello all, welcome to this webinar on time to get serious with Azure AD. We'll give it a couple of minutes and we'll get started. Hello all, a little bit about myself. I'm one of the directors at PowerOn. I've been in the IT industry for over 20 years in literally from a hands-up, grounds-on position from a sysadmin all the way up to management. I've worked for some large organizations and really been involved in the Microsoft cloud since the early BPOS days. I like to take a pragmatic and hands-on approach, and hopefully this webinar will show you some of those things. But the key thing here is that I want to apply that vision into an implementation. So we try and take a strategy and move it forward. Always easy to find, just ken.kaban@poweronplatforms.com. So easy to contact me. Just feel free to drop me an email at any time. Now, a little bit about PowerOn. We're a Microsoft Gold certified partner. We're an elite partner on the EMS side of things. We've got some MVPs, so pretty much very strong on the Microsoft stack. Along the services side is our consultancy side of things. We're very much aligned to the Windows 10 System Center and the cloud side on the EMS and the Azure Operations Management Suite, the OMS side. We also have our own bespoke products that we've built. These are pretty much Pulse series and our Camino series of products. And we've got a very large range of customers from public sector to large enterprises to councils. Now, before we get started, I'd like to just start with that vision and that strategy piece first. So I'd just like to lay the grounds on where things are going in the IT world. From an IT management perspective, we're pretty much at this stage where we're transitioning into a modern workplace. Most organizations that we talk to and that we deal with, they're at somewhere along the lines of somewhere from classic to modern. And you can see that the long-term vision for Microsoft is changing. This is, we've picked an industry where IT is always changing, and we can't really sit there and sweat assets anymore. The way things are working right now is that leading up to modern and future technologies, change is going to be a lot quicker. Whereas before we could get an operating system and look after and run it for 4 or 5 years before thinking of another operating system refresh, that is changing a lot these days. Now with Windows 10, that operating system refresh is going to be a 6-month cycle. So this impacts the way we think, the way we work, and the way IT services are provisioned. In the old days, in the classic model, where we talked about detailed designs, was specifically because we were building technologies on premise that may need to be rebuilt. So having a detailed design of these systems would allow us to rapidly redeploy those. Coming to a hybrid or modern environment, we need to think twice about the way we build, deploy, and provide services to the business. So technologies like storage, the online storage like OneDrive and SharePoint, we don't need to think about the disk space and the capacity of those environments. We do need to think about how to secure, how to make sure our documents are safe, but we've always had to do that for on-prem as well. So moving forward, the modern world is impacting the way IT works. And of course, that impact is driving some critical questions across IT. So IT, I'm just going to point out the ones that we get a lot of head nods with. So shadow IT is something that regardless of the maturity level your IT department's at, shadow IT is something that is growing massively. If I was to ask you how many of your staff are using web-based services through the office, would you be able to get a definitive answer? How many people are using box.net? How many people are logging onto Kanban flow to do project management? There are approximately 15,000 SaaS-based apps out there. Do we have visibility of that? Do we know who is using what apps? Are there access controls? So even taking it to a simpler degree, do you have access controls to your social media websites? If you're an organization that has LinkedIn, Skype presence, if it's got Facebook presence, how do you control that access? So these questions are really kicking in. And of course, compliance, data protection with GDPR and threat protection are always kicking in. Now, moving to the modern world, we're starting to see that identity is your control plane. In a Microsoft world, this is Microsoft Azure Active Directory. But when we look at this diagram, the key thing to understand here is that the on-premise AD, our bedrock, our foundation of our IT services, struggles when it's trying to expand out. So if you think about identity management tools, websites, customers, partners, for all of those type of solutions, to integrate with those solutions, we've had to build something on our on-premises AD. Now, if we take that and we start thinking about that BYO model, the strain on on-premises AD, the challenges to the IT department is massive. On the cloud side of things, we're starting to see all the major vendors providing a SaaS-based solution or at least making an attempt to provide a SaaS. Some are at the IaaS, some are at the PaaS stage, but everyone's focus is SaaS. And why is that? Because customers are saying, do I really need to manage and look after SAP infrastructure on my premises just so that I can do ERP? Why is not the vendor patching and updating this for me? So because of that, we're starting to see all of this coming together. And this is where Azure Active Directory really is a powerful tool to integrate with all of these. Now, just on a final note of this, just to understand the scale of this. There's over 12.8 million organizations, and that I think the more staggering number is that 30% year-on-year growth. We're now about to hit 1 billion users in Azure AD. So you can see that there are massive environments being built out there. We're starting to see a massive uptake on the premium version of Azure AD. So there's 56,000 paid Azure AD EMS customers, but look at the growth rate of that, 74% year on year. This is not going to get any slower. And every single Office 365 and Azure customer uses Azure AD. So this is just the built-in bedrock into that. And of course, Azure AD has evolved massively. I'm not going to particularly run through every single one of these components, but all of these functions that you're seeing here has a capability and an ability to help you. And I think this is the main reason why we need to get serious with Azure AD, simply because all of these components are built in, and for us to do this on-premise is a massive undertaking. So let's just take a look at and understand these components in a little bit more detail. So if we do a quick search for Azure Active Directory features on the internet, now it's also, the link is provided in my blog, we get this very interesting web page, but the real value is when we drive down a little bit further and we can compare these features. So as you can see that the free version of Azure Active Directory, which you get just by signing up for a trial, is half a million objects. So that is a massive size of scale. But you can see with AD Basic, where things like Office 365, Intune, etc., we're starting to get into the no object limit. So it's quite a massive growth. So think about the amount of infrastructure you would need to build and maintain for your on-premise environment, for your users and your devices. Now let's just put this here. This is Azure Active Directory at this stage is not a replacement for your on-prem AD. So doing things like group policy, etc., is not the same. I'll come into that a little bit more in the next few slides. What we're seeing here is the capabilities of Azure AD. So you can see that single sign-on is now being fed in straight into including the free version of Azure AD. So this gives us a fantastic ability to test up to 10 apps as a start, single sign-on into our apps. B2B, so B2B is business to business collaboration, where other organizations that are also on Azure AD can easily integrate and share services, apps with each other. So if you've got other partners or customers that need to access your apps, you can easily integrate it and use that with Azure AD. Now, the reporting, as you can see, is built in, and this is one of the key strong points of Azure AD, is that we are getting a centralized report of all this. Another good one here is self-service password resets. Now, you can do this for cloud users, and further down, you can do self-service password reset in the premium for your on-prem environment. So if you're utilizing Azure AD premium plans, you have the ability to set your user up to reset their own passwords without having to log tickets with IT. There's products like Application Proxy, which are very powerful in the fact that they allow you to take an on-premise application and publish it out. I'll show you a little bit around that, and I'll show you around multi-factor authentication and talk a bit about the conditional access. So as you can see, Azure AD has got a lot of capabilities that is built into the environment and offers you fantastic capability to expand out your business needs. Now, I wanted to provide this webinar with a bit more context around applying that vision, applying that view, and driving it into a practical application. So what I've done in this webinar is I've mapped these out to actual scenarios. So in the case of I want to provide my employees a secure and easy access to every application from any device. This is something that we come across a lot. This is something that IT managers and IT leaders are always going on about. How can I allow my staff to access the apps and the resources they need without having to build complicated infrastructure solutions on my on-prem AD? So let's try and answer that question in a practical sense. Okay, for those of you that aren't familiar with Azure Active Directory or the way the interface looks, this is the Microsoft Azure portal. And if I just click on that, this is generally sort of like a dashboard view that you'll get. And here is the Azure Active Directory environment. Now, I'm doing this in a lab environment. So the starting point for all of this is that we need to synchronize our users from on-premise into Azure. This is done via a tool called Azure AD Connect. Now, I mentioned the power of this tool in my blog. As I mentioned in my blog, Azure AD Connect has come a long way in synchronizing our on-prem AD into Azure. Now, there's the express settings, which means that we could literally download this, put in 2 sets of credentials on a domain joined server, and literally sync our users into Azure in minutes. Now, the custom installation gives us a lot more capability, and this is where it's come a long way. So you can see that we can synchronize user passwords from on-premise to Azure. Now, think of this as the hash algorithm that is synced. So it's not the actual password itself, but the hash algorithm. We can also do pass-through authentication, where literally we are passing through that authentication back to on-prem. And for those environments that we don't want to have any passwords, etc., stored, we can literally set up federation services. So federation allows us to put in an ADFS environment where the user signs into our ADFS environment, our federation environment, and then getting a token without having to actually put passwords into the Microsoft environment. The final piece that we've seen, and which is fairly new, is this enable single sign-on. Federation or ADFS gives us a level of single sign-on, but now AD Connect allows us to sign on to some of our apps or services in Azure AD without having to put usernames or passwords, so seamless without even knowing it's in the cloud. That single sign-on is evolving. There's a fairly good level of enablement on it, but it allows you to not have to build complex ADFS environments. Of course, with things like ADFS, you need to manage it. So you can see that AD Connect has got a lot of features that has evolved lately, and it allows us to basically filter what we want to sync to Azure, so we don't have to sync our admin accounts, we don't have to sync temporary accounts, we don't have to sync specific OUs or domains, or we can sync based on custom values that we set up in AD. So once we've synced the users, we now need to obviously allow our users access to some of these applications. So first of all, we need to set up these applications. So let's have a quick look at those applications in Azure AD. Now, hopping back into Azure AD, you can see that there is a tab here called Enterprise Applications. And this gives us an idea of all the applications that we are publishing out. Now, we can have a quick look at all these apps and break them down. Okay, as you may have noticed, there's a lot of applications here, but not all of them a Microsoft-centric app. As you can see, we've got Twitter, Skype. So let's add a new application. Now, the first thing you get to choose is an application that you're developing, an on-premise application or a non-gallery application. So think of all the apps that you have on-premise. App Proxy or Azure App Proxy allows you to take any on-premise application that is web-based, such as your intranet, and publish it out through Azure AD. You can also add applications that are in this gallery where Microsoft has built some sort of integration into. Furthermore, you could actually manually set up integration into an app that does not have a gallery integration. Now, this is quite powerful because if there are specific websites your staff are going to with credentials, you can actually allow Azure AD to manage those credentials, but users sign in with their AD credentials. So this is the key message or the key point of this, all of this, is that what you're trying to do here is to allow people access to apps, but instead of remembering multiple usernames and passwords, you want the staff to log in with their computer name and their password. So that when I say computer name, computer username, and we recommend that be changed to a UPN format so it looks like their email address. So the simple message to the end user is you can sign onto your computer with your email address and password. You can sign on to these apps with your email address and your password. Now, let's just show you what that looks like to the end user. Okay, so this is the portal that your end users would go to access their applications that you've published. This is myapps.microsoft.com. It's the application portal. There's a few ways to get to it. It gets redirected. But as you can see, this is a live environment. You can see this is PowerOn platforms, and this is the environments that I have access to. As you can see, there are a number of environments here that are not Microsoft based, and we're publishing these out from either on-premise, like this is your Stack environment, Pulse DMS Dev Portal, or third parties, for example, this cloud in SSO. So if we click on these apps and we've signed in and we've configured our SSO side of things, we can go straight into those type of apps. Now, the user portal is actually quite important because there are a few other things that we can set up in this environment. So if we look at our profile, and the users can do this, we can actually, this is where the user would actually set up their own self-service password resets, and they can also change their passwords. You can also see that I can manage my own devices from here. So the information that we've got in this profile is allowing those devices, us, the end user, to manage them, giving them the freedom to change their passwords. And of course, we're going to wrap around some security around those. So for example, if I've forgotten my password, I might be required to answer some security questions that are customized to the organization. I might need to put in my thumbprint on my biometric enabled phone. So that takes care of sort of like the applications and accessing it. Okay, and if we jump back to Azure AD, we can start now manipulating and adding those layers of protection and security around these applications. So you can see that in Azure AD, under the Manage component, we've got below that, you can see that there is something called conditional access. So now that we've got users being synchronized and we've got applications from on-premise, from the cloud, etc., we can actually start creating custom conditional access policies. So let's take a quick look at that. And you can see that we can apply this to some users, all users, or none of the users. Let's, for the sake of argument, select all users. So we're creating a new policy. Let's say allow access to intranet. And let's say that our intranet application is one of these apps. So let's select one of those. So let us call our intranet. Let's assume that this is our intranet that we're publishing out. Now, what are the conditions we'd like to do? As you can see, there's a sign-in risk. So sign-in risk is a way of determining the risk associated with the person signing in, whether they're signing in from a dodgy IP address, whether they're signing in from a computer they don't normally sign into, etc. Now, this is a premium feature. Let's not configure that, but let's configure the device platform. So let's say that we are going to apply this to all platforms. So whether they're coming from their phone, from a Mac, from a mobile device, we're going to apply a policy. We're also going to apply this condition when they're coming in from particular locations. So you can see that we've got the exclude feature here. And what we can do here is say, if we exclude all trusted locations, so I'm applying a policy that says, I'm going to apply a condition if you are not coming from a trusted location. And this could be your office network, for example. And what applications? We're going to configure this not just for the FAT client and the desktop client, but we're also going to apply this for the browser type of apps as well to our intranet, just in case that there's another way to access that. Right, so what is that condition that we're going to do? We're going to allow access, but we're going to make sure that the device is compliant, the device is domain joined, and we're going to request multi-factor authentication. And we're going to make sure that all of the options are selected. So this simple policy that we've just set up in literally 2 minutes is a very simple way of saying, if you want to access our corporate intranet from outside of the corporate network, you will need to make sure that you have a device that's compliant. That is, it's not jailbroken, it's patched, it's got antivirus on it. It's domain joined, so it's either a corporate domain joined or an Azure AD joined device. And I'm going to send you a 4-digit text message on your phone to prove who you say you are. So very quickly, we've just set up multi-factor authentication to our intranet, and we've allowed that to happen if they're outside of the corporate network. So if we just, we haven't switched the policy on, if we create that, as you can see, that extra level of security, as you can see how quickly that was applied. Now, the challenge to this is not necessarily the technology. The challenge of this is understanding the business processes and understanding the structure that you need to build. Going away from that traditional model of detailed design that I mentioned earlier, we're now getting into a point where you can create these type of policies in a spreadsheet type of format. What is the app? What is the access rule? When should you access this product? Who's allowed to access it, etc. Pause. Okay, so we've covered a bit about securing that access to those systems from any location, any device with conditional access with MFA. I've also shown you a bit about the applications and how you could deploy those applications with Azure App Proxy. There are a few other ways that we can actually automate that process as well. So for example, you've got your HR app from Workday, or you've got your expenses app that only your salespeople need, etc. Well, now we can take some of the features built into Azure Active Directory and start utilizing some of these things, such as dynamic groups. And again, this is built straight into the environment. So let's take a quick look. Start here. Okay, so here's our users and groups in our AD, and you can see I've got about 100 users here down below, but I'm interested in groups. And you can see that we can create a new group, and let's call this Marketing LinkedIn Access. Now you can see there's a membership type here, and this is where it gets interesting. The typical way that we used to do group memberships is obviously assigned, but now we're starting to see this dynamic device and dynamic user. Now most of IT, most of the modern IT environments that we talk to, most people are now familiar with dynamic user. Let's have a quick look at that. And you can see that we can create a simple query. So add users to this group if their department contains marketing. Now that's a fairly straightforward query. But as you can see, we can actually get quite advanced with these. So we can write our own advanced rules inside of this. So understanding this format, it doesn't take long, for example, to mimic new rules. Etc., etc. So I'm not going to add that query, that's totally wrong, but it gives you the understanding that you can create more complex rules. We can also set up dynamic device. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting because we've got the ability to start creating rules based on things like device ID, the name of the device. A lot of organizations have naming standards, but there's a domain name right there. So we can actually make people members of a group based on their device as well. So having done that, two things come to mind. One is you need to start populating your AD. This is something that we find a lot of organizations are actively doing. There are third-party tools out there that can update the AD. Some people make it part of their sign-on process, but AD becomes your on-premise AD becomes even more important because the tool AD Connect syncs those changes. So we're not changing the way you update your AD and manage your AD, but that having more up-to-date information on that allows us to create these. So by creating a dynamic group, for example, if I created a group based on Visio users, and this could be based on description project XYZ. Now I can start setting up access to specific applications with a dynamic group. So going back to our apps that we showed earlier, instead of creating an individual with access to that app, we can now assign these dynamic groups to them. So people will have access to a specific app based on their membership or their department or their location. So what about when we take this further? One of the key features that Azure AD gives you is B2B or business to business. And you can invite people and share these applications, again with the security and the controls. And if those partners already have Azure AD or they have AD accounts, they'll natively plug in, or else pretty much anything with an identity provider that has the right security setups, which are the most common ones like Gmail, Facebook, etc., can actually create Azure AD accounts. So this process allows you to share information, control the access, and understand the access to systems on your environment without having to create on-premise user accounts. And that looks like this. So you can see that this is our user list in our little lab environment, and we have got a new guest user. So you can see we can do an email address and put a little message. Welcome to our company, and we can invite. So I've done that earlier. Let's have a quick look at what that looks like. So let's click on Get Started. And as you can see, what we're going to be doing right now is logging on to our lab environment. But now, as you can see, I am going in with my Gmail ID. There is my Gmail ID. At this point, there is no applications available to me, but you can see the power of this where I can invite external users, B2B, access and grant them access to our apps that we deem right with conditional access with multi-factor authentication. And we can get that out to them very straightforward, and it's very easy to set up. Now, moving on, we need to understand how we're going to protect these users. And we've talked about conditional access. We've talked about those cloud-based apps. There are a few other components that we've got some things to look at. So some of the premium features that Azure AD has is called identity protection and privileged identity management. Now, I'm not going to delve too much into that. We're running short on time, but I do want to highlight the security reporting aspect of Azure AD. Now, here is our user list again. And as you can see, one of the key things that we've got here is sign-ins and audit logs. So if I was to look at the sign-ins over the last month, you can see that who was signing in, and I can run a custom audit log as well. Now this is very, very important. So I'm not going to delve too much, but you can see that we can do it by activity type, we can do it by user group. But if I was to ask as an IT manager, my team, which systems did Bob log into yesterday? That's a very complicated message or question, because IT would need to hop onto literally every single system and go through the event logs and understand whether they've signed into the intranet, they've signed into application X, application Y, etc. By publishing out all your applications and all your services through a central environment, we are creating a very easy to report on, very easy to way to audit, trail users, external users, devices. So we're getting to a very strong environment there. So something new that's come out in Azure AD, and this environment is always ever evolving, is the new access reviews in Azure AD. Now, with things like identity protection, conditional access, we're actually adding more compliance, more protection to our devices. So this app, you can't go in with without a domain joined device. This app, you can only access inside the corporate network. This app, you need to put in, or we will ring your phone to verify who you are. So that gives you that level of control and control. You also have now in public preview the new access reviews, where you can actually take some sort of review and approve those. So this is the access reviews control panel, and I'm just going to show a simple access control that you could set up to allow reviewers to allow people or verify access to a particular group or an application. To put this into a on-premise challenge that we've got, that a lot of organizations face, is that when IT set up access to a particular application or a group on an on-premise AD environment, very few times does IT go back to the business and say, does users X, Y, and Z still need access to this application? The people that need this, are they still the right people? So by doing this, we can actually allow some of that control to be put back onto the business. So if we create a new access review, and we said review access. Now, what we can do is say users to review. We're going to review the members of a group. Are we going to review everyone, or only the guest users. And remember, the guest users are our external people. But let's review everyone. And we're going to select our group that we're going to review. I didn't save the marketing group, but let's just pick out, the sales and marketing. Okay, and who will the reviewers be? Well, let's allow that, make that the group owners. Now, again, it's based on your design of your AD. You might have members or selected users, so you might select a particular user to review this access. And so let's do, I think, Megan Bound. We're going to get Megan to review all the people in the marketing group, the sales and marketing group. And we might disable the reason for approval. We might disable the mail notifications, but we will set up a reminder. So we can actually start that access review. So this is a very powerful feature that's in preview that should help keep those users, groups, applications, guests, access to corporate apps all under check. One of the final pieces that we want to do is understand how Azure Active Directory can integrate with not just the applications that are built into that environment, but how it can integrate with corporate identities and applications that you're developing. So Azure AD supports a lot of the industry standard authentication protocols and technologies. Anything that's SAML2 based authentication will integrate directly with Azure AD. The identity experience framework. So if you're developing apps, it's important to understand how you can integrate those apps with your identity. And having Azure AD is a less riskier environment for testing these out with your developers than trying to implement it on an on-prem AD. So imagine the challenges that you'd face if you were trying to integrate all this and the infrastructure you'd need to build, whereas with most of the Azure AD environments, it's code-based. And speaking of code-based, we can go to the Microsoft Graph API and actually test these out and understand how it works. So from a development perspective, it's a single API that basically proxies all the Microsoft services for you. So if you're trying to pull data off these systems, that single token, that single environment allows you to integrate your systems or apps that you're developing straight into it. Let's take a quick look at Microsoft Graph. So the first thing we need to do is go to graph.microsoft.com. And you can see right here is the Graph Explorer. Now, if I sign in with my Microsoft credential here, I can actually test these out. So yes, I'm going to let it read some of my contact details and my calendar, etc. And you can see there is a few different commands, but we can do things like get my profile. And there it is there. There's my title, there's my job title, there's my email address, there's my contact number, my photo. I'll be curious to see if it can, oh, there it is there. Fantastic. And you can see Once I've signed in, I'm pulling that out so we can run and test our queries, etc., for our systems. So this is a very powerful development environment with the Azure AD fed straight in with all the details. Again, this goes back to the key points of keeping your on-premise AD up to date. So when you synchronize that to Azure AD, your information is up to date. So this is very powerful tools. Now, I want to wrap up just to reiterate some of the key points. Azure AD has evolved so much that it's more than just syncing your on-prem AD into Microsoft Cloud Services just to allow you to access Office 365. The ability to expand your business needs, and I've deliberately done this webinar through the business case scenarios so you can understand how it can answer those questions. The ability for you to share an app from on-premise or from a different environment and wrap around a condition and multi-factor authentication is very powerful. The fact that you can integrate and allow these apps, once you've set up those conditions, to be accessed by people outside of your organization, again, once more. I've had chats with IT departments where I've asked them or I've challenged them why they create external users on their on-premise AD. Having a component like Azure AD also saves you time, reduces your support tickets if you do things like self-service password reset, allows you to hit your compliance requirements, but more importantly, it gives you that foundation, the security foundation, the audit trail foundation, the logging foundation, the reporting. There's Power BI components into Azure AD, which you can report those on as well. So if you need some more, if you need to understand this, we regularly do webinars and blogs. We hold events, so there'll be future events in 2018. Feel free to join those. And of course, if you or your organization would like to delve into this or have a particular focus, we can always arrange some personal sessions. My strongest recommendation here is to test drive a lot of these. Again, going back to what I said way earlier, is that we should be looking at changing the way we do things in IT. We don't need to build out detailed designs in an environment or an environment that is rapidly changing. I would challenge any design that you build will it be used in 18 months, let alone 6 months' time? If you were to rebuild that technology, there's a very strong possibility that that will be out of date. So with these type of mindsets, the best way to do it is define your business needs and focus on what you're trying to achieve. Get into a test drive, get into a trial of Azure AD EMS. And we at PowerOn are very strong on that side of things, so we can get you up with things like self-service, password reset, conditional access very quickly. And of course, there's some funding that Microsoft can assist you with if your projects are challenging or large enough, especially on the enterprise and mobility and security suite, so the AD premium products. Thank you all for your listening, and hope to meet you on another webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.